Azure Sandbox, and today we're going to talk about securing your Azure Sandbox environments. So we'll get started by going up to our handy dandy vanity URL, aka.ms/Azure Sandbox. And that will take us up to the Azure Architecture Center submission. So I have when you're deploying an Azure Sandbox environment, um, you're going to be deploying a variety of different resources in Azure, and each of them have their own attack surface and their own, special security profile, right? So at a high level, you're starting with, an Azure subscription with some resources provisioned on it, right? And that Azure subscription, is an attack surface, right? Within that Azure subscription, you've got a resource group for Azure. That's the way that Azure Resource Manager organizes different resources that you have provisioned in Azure. And that resource group is an attack surface. And then every single thing we have deployed in here can be considered an attack surface, right? Um, if you look at the way that you can access your sandbox environment, either through Bastion or through Azure vWAN, those are ways that you can come in over a public IP address to use your sandbox environment, right? So those are obvious attack surfaces that you need to be thinking about how to secure, right? Um, you've got your virtual machines, right? Your two jump boxes, Jump Win 1, Jump Linux 1. You've got your SQL Server virtual machine, right? So there's 3 VMs included in the base sandbox configuration, in addition to whatever else you happen to provision in there. Those VMs themselves are attack surfaces, and they could potentially, have data associated with them that, could be sensitive or important to protect, right? You've got 2 different databases that could potentially be part of your sandbox environment. You've got an Azure SQL database, and you've got an Azure MySQL Flexible Server database, right? Both of them could also potentially contain sensitive data. Additionally, you've got a key vault for storing secrets. That's obviously important to protect, right? You've got an automation account that we use to configure things. You've got a storage account, which could include some sensitive data, right? And you've got a log analytics workspace that we use to log metrics to as we're monitoring your sandbox environment. So all of these things are services in Azure. They're part of the Azure surface area, and they're things that you need to think about protecting. Now, if you're just standing up a sandbox environment for a quick demo or for a class or something, and you're going to tear it down, within a day or two of using it, and you're not putting any sensitive data out there, that's, probably something that you don't have to think too hard about securing because there's a lot of security already built in. For example, we're using private endpoints for everything, and you're using Microsoft Entra ID authentication to get into your Bastion host to access your VMs, right? You're using, security certificates to access the point-to-site VPN capabilities in vWAN. So these public endpoints as well as these private endpoints that we use to access services have a nice built-in security profile to help limit the attack surface for those particular resources, right? Um, you know, but beyond that, if you have a sandbox environment that's going to live for a while and you're going to be hosting data in there, the first recommendation, of course, is that, if you're going to be hosting any data that's sensitive, you're probably going to want to run that by your InfoSec department. Now, most enterprises will opt to not host sensitive data in the sandbox, and if they need some test data, that they would put anonymized data there, right? But if there is sensitive data in there, you probably want to pull in some of your InfoSec colleagues to, verify that you have the right controls in place to secure your environment. Now, in the case where you do have a long living sandbox that does have some sensitive data or sensitive capabilities or some IP in there that you want to protect, you may want to consider provisioning Azure Defender for Cloud. So, Defender for Cloud has a few different key pillars. The first is, some capabilities to help you secure your DevOps pipelines from, the point where you create code to the actions that you use to provision, deploy, and configure your code, kind of end to end, right? There's the whole middle portion here of cloud security posture management, where you're looking across your Azure estate and you're looking at potential vulnerabilities and you're, remediating and mitigating them one at a time or en masse, right? And then you've got advanced threat protection for each of your individual cloud workloads. So, for example, Azure SQL Database has its own, Defender capability. Azure Storage has its own Defender capability where you can scan your blobs for malware and things of that nature, right? And Defender, obviously works great with Azure, but we've done a lot of work to also extend that to other cloud environments, including AWS, GCP, and even on-premises resources through Azure Arc. So what we're going to do today is we're going to enable Defender for Cloud on a default sandbox environment. And then we're going to see what kind of vulnerabilities it picks up and how we can potentially remediate those. And, anytime that you're deploying a sandbox environment, you should be having a mind towards security, and you should be having a mind towards protecting the assets that your employer, is entrusting you with, right? So let's lock all the doors and close all the windows and, keep those attackers at bay. Okay, so